The most powerful navy on Earth once found itself sheltering behind a damaged oil tanker. 3 guided missile warships moved into a single-file formation behind a crippled supertanker after a sea mine blasted an 11 by 5 foot opening in its hull. The reason was simple. The explosion that barely slowed the tanker would have sent any of those warships to the bottom of the Persian Gulf within minutes. The Bridgeton stretched more than 1,000 feet in length and displaced 414,000 tons. Its size equaled roughly 3 football fields placed end to end. When the vessel struck the mine while traveling at 16 miles per hour, it continued forward at 16 miles per hour. A ship weighing 414,000 tons cannot be brought to a halt within 3 miles and 30 minutes. No matter how urgently alarms sound across the bridge, the explosion tore a gap large enough to fit a truck through. Yet the impact affected the massive tanker about as much as a mosquito affects an elephant. The USS Kidd, USS Fox, and USS Crommelin had been assigned to escort the Bridgeton through the Strait of Hormuz. After the detonation, all 3 American warships stopped. Captain Frank Seitz contacted the commanders aboard those heavily armed destroyers. His message was direct. The mine that had only slightly inconvenienced his tanker would have completely destroyed any one of their vessels. He advised them to move behind him. They followed that advice. For the remainder of the voyage, 3 United States Navy warships traveled in line behind a wounded Kuwaiti supertanker, effectively allowing the damaged giant to serve as a minesweeper. At one point, a Soviet minesweeper passed in the opposite direction. The American captain warned the Soviet commander about the dangerous minefield ahead. The Soviet officer responded over the radio, "Thank you, American warship." Images of the convoy appeared on front pages around the world. The following morning, readers across Iran saw those photographs and celebrated. Many were still celebrating 14 months later. That was when Operation Praying Mantis sank or disabled approximately half of Iran's combat-capable fleet in only 8 hours. It was also when Ayatollah Khomeini declared that accepting the ceasefire to end the war felt more bitter than drinking poison. Iran then accepted the United Nations resolution that brought the 8-year conflict to a close, despite earlier promises to continue fighting until ultimate victory. This history remains deeply embedded in the institutional memory of every IRGC commander who survived the opening strikes of Operation Epic Fury in February 2026. Iranian strategic planners study those events carefully. American operational planners used many of the same lessons while preparing for the current confrontation. What unfolded in the Persian Gulf during 1987 and 1988 is not simply a chapter from the past. It became the framework for later encounters between American naval strength and Iranian maritime pressure, including the confrontation that helped produce the agreement endorsed simultaneously by 9 world leaders during Memorial Day weekend of 2026. To understand how the tanker war emerged, it is necessary to return to 1980. In September of that year, Saddam Hussein examined revolutionary Iran and saw what military strategists often call a window of opportunity. The Shah had fallen. Many senior officers who had built Iran's military around American equipment and doctrine had either been expelled or executed after the revolution. Political factions inside the country were competing among themselves while trying to consolidate power. The hostage crisis had cut Iran off from American military assistance. There was also a specific objective that Saddam had long desired: the Shatt al-Arab waterway in the oil-rich province of Khuzestan. 8 years later, roughly 1 million people across both nations had lost their lives. Front lines shifted repeatedly over the same territory, creating a battlefield that resembled the trench warfare of the First World War, transplanted into a modern desert. Chemical weapons were employed against military forces and civilians alike. Both economies suffered devastating damage. Neither country achieved the decisive triumph that could justify the enormous cost. By approximately 1984, leaders on both sides had independently concluded that conventional military operations would not break the deadlock. A different strategy emerged. Instead of seeking victory through battlefield success, each side began targeting the economic foundations supporting the war effort. The focus became oil revenue in the Persian Gulf. That meant attacking tankers. Iraq started striking Iranian export facilities at Karg Island, the primary terminal through which Iran converted petroleum reserves into the money needed to continue fighting. Iran responded by targeting ships connected to Iraq's trading partners. Then came the escalation that transformed a 2-country economic conflict into a worldwide maritime crisis. Kuwait was providing extensive financial support to Iraq. Billions of dollars in loans flowed to Saddam Hussein. Iraqi crude moved through Kuwaiti ports aboard Kuwaiti vessels because Iraq's coastline had become severely restricted by the war's geography. Without Kuwait's financial and logistical assistance, Iraq's ability to sustain the conflict would have been far more difficult. Iran viewed this arrangement through a straightforward strategic lens. If Iraqi oil facilities could be considered legitimate targets, then Kuwaiti tankers supporting Iraq could also be considered legitimate targets. By 1986, more than 200 neutral tankers had come under attack in the Gulf. Approximately 25% of those incidents involved Kuwaiti shipping. Oil prices climbed around the globe because 60% of the world's traded oil passed through the Strait of Hormuz in 1987. Today, the figure is approximately 20%. The economic consequences of the tanker war were severe on a scale that made the current conflict's 20% figure appear historically significant as well. Kuwait responded with a remarkably effective geopolitical move. It approached the Soviet Union first. Moscow immediately agreed. The Soviet leadership welcomed the opportunity to position naval forces inside the most important oil corridor on Earth and establish a presence in the Persian Gulf that had long remained beyond its reach. For Soviet strategists, the Kuwaiti request represented exactly the type of opening they had hoped would appear. Washington observed Soviet interest in the Gulf and reached a rapid conclusion. The United States would not permit Soviet naval forces to gain influence near such a critical concentration of global oil supplies. In March 1987, the Reagan administration approved Kuwait's proposal. 11 Kuwaiti tankers would be reflagged. The Kuwaiti markings would be removed. American flags would replace them. The ships would receive new names and be registered under United States ownership. Any attack against those vessels would no longer be viewed as an attack on Kuwait. It would be viewed as an attack on the United States. Operation Earnest Will became one of the largest convoy missions conducted by America since the Second World War. Aircraft carriers, battleships, destroyers, frigates, cruisers, Coast Guard cutters, AWACS aircraft, Army Special Operations helicopters, Navy SEALs, and special boat units all became part of the effort. A broad array of American military power entered the Persian Gulf to escort 11 reflagged Kuwaiti tankers through waters where Iran had been using anti-ship missiles, gunboats, speedboats carrying RPG teams, and naval mines. The Bridgeton became the centerpiece of the first convoy. More than 1,000 feet long and weighing 414,000 tons, the vessel stretched across the equivalent of 3 football fields. It carried oil worth more than the entire economies of several small nations. The message behind the operation was unmistakable. The immense size of the tanker, combined with the military escort, was intended to signal that the United States had entered the Persian Gulf and planned to remain until maritime routes were secure. The signal was received. On the 22nd of July, 1987, Iranian F-4 Phantom aircraft approached the convoy for observation. After seeing the force assembled below, they turned around and returned home. Meanwhile, the IRGC was preparing a different response. An aging landing craft carrying vintage Russian-designed M08 contact mines departed during the night of the 23rd of July. 9 mines were placed across the convoy's intended route, each separated by approximately 500 yards. The vessel then returned. American intelligence had identified another Iranian attack plan and watched it get canceled. The mining operation went completely unnoticed. During the early hours of the 24th of July, 1987, Captain Frank Seitz stood on the bridge of the Bridgeton. The sea was calm. Temperatures approached 100 degrees. Everything appeared normal. Then the mine exploded. Seitz later described the sensation as if a 500-ton hammer had crashed onto the ship. The blast tore an 11 by 5 foot opening in the hull and flooded a tank compartment. Yet the Bridgeton weighed 414,000 tons. Its momentum remained overwhelming. The ship continued moving at 16 miles per hour. Seitz ordered a crash astern maneuver, the maritime emergency procedure requiring engines to reverse at maximum power. The tanker still needed 3 miles and 30 minutes to stop. It continued ahead. Behind it, the 3 American warships halted. Seitz radioed the commanders aboard USS Kidd, USS Fox, and USS Crommelin, and informed them of exactly what had occurred. The mine that had barely slowed the supertanker would have sunk any one of those warships. Captain Frank Seitz instructed the American warships to move in behind his tanker. They did exactly that. The same United States Navy that had deployed aircraft carriers, battleships, destroyers, frigates, cruisers, and Coast Guard cutters to display American strength in the Persian Gulf was now proceeding in a single column behind a damaged Kuwaiti supertanker while a Soviet minesweeper passed in the opposite direction. The image appeared across the world, but another image would dominate headlines the following April. In October 1987, Iran launched Chinese-built Silkworm anti-ship missiles toward Kuwaiti territory. The first missile missed its designated objective and struck a tanker named the Sunni. The second missile hit the Sea Isle City, one of the American reflagged tankers. 18 people suffered injuries. The vessel's American captain lost his eyesight permanently. Iran proclaimed the attack as a victory. President Reagan approved Operation Nimble Archer. 4 American destroyers headed toward 2 Iranian oil platforms in the Rostam oil field that the IRGC had converted into military installations supporting fast attack boat missions. The destroyers transmitted warnings 20 minutes before the strike to allow personnel to leave. After that, they began firing. Their 5-inch guns continued shooting for 90 minutes. More than 1,000 rounds slammed into the structures. The platforms were transformed into burning wreckage. Afterward, Navy SEALs boarded a third platform, collected intelligence materials, and departed. For the next 6 months, Iran stopped firing missiles at tankers carrying the American flag. The mining campaign continued. During the night between the 13th and 14th of April 1988, an Iranian vessel called the Iran Ajr secretly deployed a 12-mine barrier across the route of a United States Navy frigate traveling north for refueling. That frigate was USS Samuel B. Roberts. Captain Paul Rinn commanded the ship. For 2 years, his crew had become familiar with his relentless focus on damage control exercises. Every drill was repeated. Every emergency procedure was practiced. Every possible form of battle damage was rehearsed. Rinn believed that survival during a crisis depended on actions that had already become instinct. He wanted his sailors responding automatically before their conscious minds fully understood the situation. From the day he assumed command, he worked to build that response into the crew. Late in the afternoon on the 14th of April 1988, USS Samuel B. Roberts was moving north through the Central Gulf. An officer on watch spotted 3 dark objects floating ahead and immediately informed the captain. Rinn arrived on the bridge and confirmed they were mines. He ordered all engines stopped. General quarters was called. However, he deliberately avoided sounding the alarm. He did not want sailors running through the ship and creating vibrations that could activate another mine still undetected. The frigate slowly began backing away while requesting assistance from a minesweeper. 10 minutes later, a 4th mine that nobody had identified exploded directly beneath the vessel. The blast lifted the entire frigate out of the water. A hole measuring 21 feet was torn into the hull. The keel fractured. Fuel lines broke apart. Flames surged through the engine room. Seawater rushed inside at a rate that calculations suggested would sink the ship in roughly 90 seconds. Then the training took over. The crew of USS Samuel B. Roberts accomplished something naval engineers later considered nearly impossible under those conditions. They battled fires while fighting flooding at the same time. They reinforced damaged bulkheads with timber. When the vessel began separating along the broken keel, sailors stretched steel cables across the superstructure and tightened them to keep the ship together. For 5 hours, they struggled to save the frigate. USS Samuel B. Roberts eventually reached Dubai. 10 sailors were injured. Not a single crew member died. Soon afterward, divers examined the blast site. Fragments of the mine were recovered. Serial numbers matched mines previously seized from the Iranian mine layer, Iran Ajr, during the previous year. The evidence trail was clear. An Iranian government vessel had deployed Iranian mines that damaged an American frigate. The report reached President Ronald Reagan. Reagan described the coming response as proportional. The United States Navy interpreted the order very differently. 4 days later, on the 18th of April 1988, Operation Praying Mantis began. 3 surface action groups built around destroyers and support vessels entered the operation. USS Enterprise remained outside the Gulf as strategic support. Each group received specific targets. Their objectives included 2 Iranian oil platforms converted into IRGC bases and Iran's most capable frigates, Sahand and Sabalan. The first objective was the Sasan platform. Warnings were issued. Most Iranian personnel departed. 1 individual remained behind a 23mm anti-aircraft gun and opened fire on the approaching American ships. The response was immediate. A single 5-inch shell silenced the position. Marines then arrived by helicopter, placed demolition charges, and destroyed the platform. The Syria platform was next. Iranian defenders opened fire there as well. American destroyers answered with repeated 5-inch gunfire. The structure burned so intensely that the accompanying SEAL demolition team never needed to use its explosives. The fire accomplished the task on its own. Then the Iranian fast attack vessel Joshin accelerated toward the second American group. Warnings were transmitted. Joshin acknowledged them and stated that it would comply. Moments later, it launched a Harpoon missile at the American warships. Countermeasures diverted the missile. Its guidance system lost the target. Approximately 30 seconds later, 5 American missiles headed back toward Joshin. The Iranian vessel had no effective defensive systems. Every Iranian aboard Joshin was killed. 3 Iranian F-4 Phantom fighters then approached from the north seeking retaliation. American surface-to-air missiles rose to meet them. 1 Phantom was struck and lost a wing. The remaining 2 aircraft reversed course so rapidly they nearly collided. A-6 intruders operating from USS Enterprise located the Iranian frigate Sahand. Sahand opened fire on the aircraft. That action authorized an American response. The frigate was sunk. A Harpoon missile struck the hull. A laser-guided bomb penetrated the deck. A 2,000-pound bomb completed the attack. Soon afterward, American aircraft found Sabalan attempting to withdraw. An A-6 delivered a 2,000-pound bomb into the ship's engine room. The resulting explosion devastated the compartment. Sabalan was left dead in the water. Eventually, Washington contacted naval commanders and instructed them to halt operations. The order was not given because the United States was struggling. It was issued because continued attacks could have eliminated the remainder of Iran's navy within the same day. In only 8 hours, the United States Navy sank or disabled approximately half of Iran's combat-capable fleet. Attacks against neutral shipping in the Gulf declined immediately after Operation Praying Mantis. 3 months later, on the 18th of July, 1988, Iran accepted the United Nations ceasefire resolution ending the 8-year conflict with Iraq. Iran had been fighting that war since 1980. The Ayatollah had repeatedly promised that the struggle would continue until victory. The conflict had cost Iran roughly 500,000 military personnel and civilians. Ayatollah Khomeini announced the ceasefire in a speech. He stated that accepting it felt more bitter than drinking poison. The leader whose revolution had portrayed America as the great Satan publicly acknowledged that continuing the war was worse than swallowing poison. Operation Earnest Will officially concluded on the 26th of September 1988. USS Vandegrift escorted the final tanker into Kuwait. The operation ultimately included 25 convoys. More than 250 merchant vessels were escorted safely. Following the difficult opening day involving Bridgeton, not one ship traveling within a convoy was successfully attacked during the next 14 months. Beginning with the image of 3 guided missile warships following behind a damaged Kuwaiti supertanker, the United States Navy had helped bring an 8-year war to its conclusion. That history remains embedded in every strategic calculation connected to the current conflict. The operational model established by Earnest Will and Praying Mantis became the precedent for later campaigns and remains impossible for Iranian planners to ignore. The sequence has remained remarkably consistent. Iran mines shipping lanes or attacks maritime traffic. America answers with convoy missions or enforcement operations. Iran escalates by striking American assets directly. The United States responds with a military operation designed to be devastating without becoming total. Iran evaluates the consequences and concludes that prolonged confrontation against American naval power cannot be sustained at an acceptable cost. Iran then accepts terms. In 1988, Operation Praying Mantis destroyed or disabled roughly half of Iran's combat fleet in 8 hours. 3 months later, Khomeini accepted a ceasefire. In 2026, Operation Epic Fury destroys 85% of Iran's ballistic missile capability, drone manufacturing capacity, and naval industrial infrastructure. Project Freedom eliminates 7 IRGC fast attack boats within seconds, using Apache helicopters while suffering 0 American casualties. 161 Iranian vessels are sunk during the conflict. 90% of Iranian mines are cleared. The blockade removes $500 million per day from regime finances. Iran's petroleum engineering timeline reaches its limit. The deal is announced during Memorial Day weekend of 2026. Trump placed calls to 9 world leaders at the same time. All 9 responded with the same answer. We are in. Iran agreed to transfer the uranium under IAEA verification procedures. The sequence repeated itself, shaped by 4 decades of technological progress and strategic evolution. The difference between the confrontation of 1988 and the confrontation of 2026 was not the pattern itself. It was the scale and the tools involved. In 1988, half of Iran's fleet was sunk or disabled within 8 hours. In 2026, a prolonged campaign destroyed 85% of Iran's military-industrial foundation. The Bridgeton striking an M08 contact mine during 1987 and the IRGC mining the Strait of Hormuz in 2026 were separated by 40 years. Yet both events emerged from the same assumption. The belief was that the geography of the Strait of Hormuz could be used as a weapon against the world economy. In 1987, that assumption ended with Operation Praying Mantis. In 2026, it ended with the announcement of a deal. The crew of USS Samuel B. Roberts spent 5 hours holding their damaged vessel together after the keel snapped. 10 sailors were injured. No one died. That episode reflected a military culture built on preparation, repetition, and discipline. The damage control expertise that preserved the ship came from training repeated until reactions became automatic. The same approach can be seen in the results of Project Freedom. 7 IRGC fast attack boats were destroyed. American casualties remained at 0. The same outcome appeared during the strikes that disabled MTC Star 3 and MT7 Sveta. The same pattern appeared again when Shahed drones failed to overwhelm defensive systems. Operation Praying Mantis became notable for another reason. Washington eventually ordered the operation to stop. The reason was not military weakness. The limitation was political. Naval commanders were prepared to continue. The instruction came from the White House. The objective was to persuade Iran to stop attacking shipping and accept terms. That objective required leaving enough military capability intact for Iranian leadership to make that choice. Eliminating every remaining asset was not considered necessary. A similar restraint appears in the current operation. The GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator carried by the B-2 Spirit remained available for use against deeply buried facilities. A request was submitted for deployment of the Dark Eagle hypersonic missile. Flight profiles involving B-2 aircraft over Diego Garcia were recorded at the operational tempo, normally associated with strikes against hardened targets. Yet the uranium leaves Iran through an agreement rather than through destruction on site. The strategic goal is different. Verified transfer of nuclear material creates a more durable result than physical destruction alone. A strike would still require verification. Verification requires IAEA access. The agreement preserves that access. The encounter involving Joshan in 1988 remains a benchmark. After firing a Harpoon missile at American destroyers, the vessel received 5 American missiles in return. Only 30 seconds separated the Iranian launch from the American response. Today, IRGC fast attack boat commanders near Keshem and Larak evaluate similar realities while observing the 130 boat formation identified through Sentinel-2 imagery. They understand the consequences of engaging Apache helicopters, F-35Bs, and F-A-18s operating overhead. Joshan carried a Harpoon missile. Modern American destroyers possess far more extensive defenses. These include the Phalanx CIWS, Sea Sparrow short-range missiles, standard missile systems including SM-2 and SM-6 variants, and the Aegis combat architecture that integrates all of them into a unified defensive network. Countermeasures defeated Joshan's Harpoon. The Chinese-derived C-802 anti-ship missile fielded by IRGC fast attack boats faces similar challenges. Electronic warfare systems aboard the EA-18G Growler are designed to disrupt missile seekers before terminal targeting can occur. The M08 mine that struck USS Samuel B. Roberts and the mines deployed by the IRGC in 2026 differ by 4 decades in age. Their purpose remains unchanged. A moored mine waits beneath the surface until a vessel enters its activation range or makes direct contact. It does not identify targets. It cannot distinguish between a commercial tanker and an American warship. It functions mechanically. The mine-clearing effort in 2026 represents the modern evolution of lessons learned from the Bridgeton incident and the Samuel B. Roberts incident. Avenger-class mine countermeasure vessels participate in the effort. MH-60S helicopters equipped for mine warfare contribute as well. Mk-18 autonomous underwater vehicles operate beneath the surface. Lamprey seabed monitoring systems support the operation. Together, they execute the doctrine that emerged from those earlier mine strikes. Operation Earnest will officially concluded on the 26th of September, 1988. USS Vandegrift escorted the final tanker into Kuwait. Across 14 months, the mission conducted 25 convoy operations. More than 250 merchant vessels were escorted safely. The campaign demonstrated a result that Ayatollah Khomeini later described as more bitter than drinking poison. The announcement of the 2026 agreement arrived during Memorial Day weekend. Trump contacted 9 world leaders simultaneously. All 9 agreed. This time, there was no speech comparing acceptance to poison. The current leadership structure produced no equivalent public statement. With Ali Kham dead, following the compound strike on the 28th of February and Mojtaba Khamenei's injuries, creating uncertainty regarding governance capacity, no comparable declaration emerged. Yet the uranium is still leaving Iran. The petroleum engineering timeline produced a result that did not require an 8-hour naval battle to achieve. In 1988, military consequences arrived immediately. In 2026, economic pressure became an additional factor. The blockade remained in place. Operation Epic Fury continued degrading military capability. The petroleum engineering clock continued advancing toward irreversible production losses. Together, those pressures produced the agreement. USS Samuel B. Roberts had been expected to sink within 90 seconds. Instead, after Operation Earnest Will concluded, the ship was towed to Maine, the vessel was cut apart. A new center section was constructed. The ship was welded back together. Exactly 1 year after the mine explosion, USS Samuel B. Roberts returned to sea. It remained in service for another 27 years before retiring in 2015. The sailors who secured steel cables across the broken keel while flames spread through the engine room and seawater poured through a 21-foot breach did not save their vessel through luck. They survived because they executed procedures practiced repeatedly under Captain Rinn. He did not sound the alarm because he did not want crew members running through the ship and creating additional vibrations. That level of professional competence separated a trained naval crew from a group of individuals sharing the same vessel. The same professionalism appears throughout current operations. Project Freedom recorded 0 American casualties. 7 fast attack boats now rest on the seabed. Apache crews tracked targets through thermal optics and generated firing solutions within seconds. P-8 crews deployed sonobuoys along transit routes to locate Gadir submarines positioned on the seafloor. Avenger-class crews methodically cleared mine corridors so insurance underwriters could certify safe passage before issuing coverage. The photograph of Bridgeton appeared across newspapers worldwide. Khomeini's statement about poison reached audiences everywhere. Operation Praying Mantis lasted 8 hours before Washington ordered a halt. The current agreement proceeds through a 60-day implementation period, beginning with the signing of the accord. The pattern remains. Technology changes, timelines change, methods evolve, but the central conclusion remains unchanged. Iran's strategic assessment repeatedly reaches the point where continued confrontation with American naval power is judged unsustainable. In 1988, that realization arrived 3 months after Operation Praying Mantis. Khomeini accepted the outcome. In 2026, 3 months of blockade pressure, the petroleum engineering timeline, reduced Chinese oil purchases, the leaked Supreme National Security Council document, and the presidential appeal urging citizens to switch off 8 of every 10 lamps produced the same destination. Iran accepted terms. The pattern remained intact. USS Samuel B. Roberts survived after steel cables were stretched across a broken keel. USS George H.W. Bush remains in the Arabian Sea. The uranium is leaving Iran. If you enjoyed this historical analysis and military narrative, remember to follow for more in-depth stories covering naval warfare, geopolitical strategy, and the events that continue shaping global security today.